When you look at a traditional map of the world, there's always a very neat order to things. Each country has a name and a single color. This is China. The people that live here are Chinese and Beijing is the capital. But then when you travel, things become a lot more interesting. As our teams in Shanghai, in Beijing and in Basel in Switzerland are building the actual experiences that make up our Viking exclusive itineraries in China, I have the privilege of helping to shape what these will look like, and for that I traveled to China to find not one color but a kaleidoscope, and that country on the map comes alive with people, flavors, sounds and textures. To whet your appetite for this amazing destination, or if you've already booked to give you a flavor of what you can expect, here is a travelogue of my most recent visits. I hope you enjoy my postcards from China. Hello, I'm Joost Ouendag. In the next half hour, I will give you an idea of what to expect when you travel to China with us. We have 4 new itineraries, each one of which features a coastal voyage between Shenzhen, Hong Kong's neighbor to the north, and Shanghai. And this coastal voyage is combinable with China highlights as the Great Wall, Beijing's Forbidden City, the Terracotta Warriors in Xi'an, or the Panda Bears in Chengdu, or Lhasa in Tibet. My focus for the last few months as I traveled to China were these cities along the coast. They're lesser known. They don't see as many visitors yet as other places in China, and they're quite intriguing all in their own right. So let me take you on a journey. When I visited Shenzhen earlier this year, I flew into Hong Kong, and I spent the better part of the day there before boarding the Viking Yidun, which brought me to my destination. In Hong Kong, though, I had time to visit the Hong Kong Palace Museum. During the tumultuous decades of the 19th and 20th century, the Forbidden City was ransacked repeatedly, the last time in 1937 during the war with Japan. Each time, priceless art was also salvaged and spirited away, to Hong Kong and to Taiwan in particular. In Hong Kong, these items are now the core of a fascinating new museum that does a magnificent job in telling the story of daily life in the Forbidden City, of the traditional Chinese craftsmanship that has endured into the present, and particularly of the development of Chinese pottery and porcelain over the centuries. What you get to see there in the way of porcelain is just absolutely amazing. So it's worth a visit. I thought my visit to Hong Kong was worth it just for that one museum. Oh, and upon arrival in Hong Kong the previous night, I was able to commemorate the closing of the Year of the Rabbit, my own year, with a special dessert. It came with a piece of candy. The White Rabbit brand is known all over China. The white ones with no particular flavor seem to be the most popular, but they also come with coffee, chocolate, banana, and if you're really adventurous, wasabi. The next day, I woke up in Shenzhen, next to the futuristic-looking terminal building where the ship was docked. Our neighbors here at Daijang Innovations, better known by their acronym, DJI. It is a company that is at the leading edge of small drone technology and robotics. And we had a chance to take a look behind the scenes, getting an idea of the workspace, the way the company interacts with the local community. I was actually told that this is where the recruitment process starts, with local school children that take a look and get a presentation from the gentleman that runs the facility. And finally, we stepped out to play a bit with one of the company's new drones. Hang on for the ride. On the east side of Shenzhen, we visited the Daping Fortress, a small walled city that originally was created for a garrison that fought off pirates in offshore waters. The original settlement dates back to the 14th century, and while it's bustling with activity today, there are enough quiet corners in which it's not too difficult to imagine a more tranquil time, particularly when you go into the little courtyards. You can get a little lost, just enough to find back very quickly to the main roads, but it's quite a delightful little place. After we had a good look around, we continued to the seaside because it was well past lunchtime and we were all hungry. 5 millennia of civilization have given the Chinese plenty of time to refine their cuisines. I'm using the plural because people enjoy their food in a very local manner. You eat what grows and lives close by, and on the coast, that's fish and shellfish. And because the Chinese like their fresh fish, good restaurants allow patrons to pick their fish, well, super fresh, straight out of the aquariums. Back in Shenzhen, at the end of the day, it was time for more food. With its young and affluent workforce, downtown Shenzhen has a vast number of popular restaurants. We settled on mushroom hot pot. A boiling hot broth is used to swiftly cook a very wide variety of food, in this case mushrooms, at the table. Hot pot is so popular in China that we've actually converted some of the tables on the aquavit terrace to hot pot tables. It's really simple. You just drill a hole in the middle, and that's where you lower the pot with the broth, and off you go. And you can basically stick anything in the broth that you would like and that you would enjoy. The Chinese are masters at this, especially in the south. Behind this particular hot pot, you can see a dish decorated with limes and on ice. That's something best described as mushroom sushi. No, I know what you're thinking, but in fact, this is quite delicious. After Shenzhen, Maggie and I traveled north by train to a region in Fujian known for its tulus. These are fortified multi-family houses. Some of them are hundreds of years old. People have found refuge in the hills of Fujian since time immemorial. And the people that settled in these hills usually did so because they didn't have a lot of other options. More often than not, they were refugees from elsewhere. Building a round house, there are some square ones and there's even one or two oval ones, with only one entrance and no windows on the ground floor, was a way to stay safe in a hostile environment. These remote areas, often densely forested, had dangerous large animals, tigers, bears, as well as roving bands of sinister characters. So to have a building with just one entrance kept the people inside safe. There were wells on the inside so that people could survive for quite a while. In the ground floors, there were stables. There were also storage areas where people could store a lot of food just in case they needed to remain inside for a prolonged period of time. Some of the buildings have large open areas in the middle, while others continue to develop from the outside in. And eventually that creates a maze of sorts inside the walls, where you can easily get lost. Because these buildings are usually without running water and other comforts, they're slowly abandoned. Businesses catering to visitors take over the ground floors, while more and more upper stories remain closed much of the time, while the homeowners spend much of their time elsewhere, in more comfortable circumstances. I was offered a cup of tea, more than one, the Chinese rarely stop at just one cup of tea, by the owner of a small tea shop. While the building we were in was some 6 centuries old, she was able to vacuum seal the tea I bought and only accepted Alipay. No cash, no credit cards. So the present and the past really live side by side in China. The Tulos are inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List, and my visit here was one of the best days I've had in China. Xiamen, a little to the northeast of the Tulos, is an absolutely delightful city. The core of the urban area is located on an island, and that means the water is never that far away. And that means there's a breeze, blue skies, and blue waves. I think it is no coincidence that two of the tallest towers in the city look like giant sails. Just off the coast of Xiamen proper lies the small island of Gulangyu, and there Wang Changting was waiting for us. He's a former president of the island's Oral History Society. He took us on a tour of the island's highlights, carefully sticking to quiet back roads. The man knew the island inside out. Not only did he have an enormous number of stories to tell, he had authoritative answers to any questions that came his way. He was really very impressive. His English turned out to be better than my Chinese, but we mostly interacted through an interpreter. She insisted on calling him Professor Wang. It was easy to understand her reverence. Even across the language barrier, it was clear that he was a formidable storyteller. We ended our afternoon with him in a delightful, serene tea house. Gulangyu used to be the abode for foreign diplomats and businessmen, and later of wealthy expats who had returned to China. With its car-free lanes and its large banyan trees and dramatic views, it is really a place like you would not find anywhere else in China. I think also it's just not a place that you expect in China. Another place I can wholeheartedly recommend after spending time there is the Wei Stone Culture Park. That's quite a mouthful, but essentially it's a museum and a workshop where a family of stone carvers, the youngest member is in the 8th generation and he actually studied in Portland, speaks English quite well. They honor the tradition and also move it forward. So the indoor and the outdoor galleries, there are works of art from many regions of China, and some are very old, and others are more recent, and some are incredibly refined, and some are just funny and a little irreverent. Chinese do not have such a distinction between high culture and low culture. They are much more comfortable in mixing it up a little bit, as long as it is pleasing to the eye. It's part of our included shore excursion in Xiamen, but a select number of guests have the option of spending more time here, and they can try their hand at stone carving under the watchful eye of a master and enjoying a very exquisite lunch. The menu is completely vegetarian, and Buddhism brought vegetarianism to China millennia ago. So the Chinese really have a long-standing tradition of creating vegetarian dishes. It's very much unlike in places when I was a little younger in Western Europe. It was kind of like, what do we do now that we have lost the meat in our meals? It's not like that at all. It's exquisite, it is detailed, and it's a delight for the senses. Another way of engaging with decorative art in Xiamen is to visit what is called the Old Town. And that's relative because that in Xiamen means the 20th century Old Town. This is a place where after World War II, a lot of wealthy expats came back to China and brought with them the culture of the places they had visited. So some of the buildings that you see there are surprisingly Western in outlook and in architecture. And one of the things that were brought from Europe were these floral decorative tiles that people used on their floors. And you can visit one of these homes tucked away in a narrow alley and then visit the workshop of Lin Yuming. And he's a creative soul that has rediscovered these tiles, and he's now bringing them back. And he uses very artisanal techniques to create these beautiful patterns, and they by now make their way all over the world because he showcases his work in magazines that are picked up on the American West Coast and in big cities in Europe, and he exports his tiles everywhere. They're still all handmade, and they're actually surprisingly reasonable in price. Viking guests can participate in a workshop, creating their very own memento from their time in Xiamen. A little distance north of Xiamen is the ancient city of Quanzhou. As an important trading hub during the Song and Yuan dynasties, it welcomed visitors and merchants from all over the world for centuries. Marco Polo is said to have visited. And it is known as a city of temples and other houses of worship and of commerce. A few years ago, Quanzhou's historical significance was recognized when it was inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List. The Buddhist Kaiwan Temple, with its two tall, towering pagodas, is one of the most beautiful I've seen. What I think is particularly enjoyable is the fact that this temple is not a museum, but a living entity. Some parts are ancient, other parts are much more modern. And these temples are still very much in use. You can see people worshiping there, and you can see people visiting and just taking pictures with their families. It's all very much alive. Next door, the Tangwai Guan Yi Taoist temple, that's quite a mouthful, has a most colorful dragon roof, and it's also a very, very popular temple. The old tradition of offering fake paper money to be burned as an offering here has been replaced by something that is a lot more environmentally friendly. You can use a QR code from a screen to make a donation to the temple, which in turn offers a screen with frames. Down the road is a rare mosque. Quanzhou was an important terminus of the maritime Silk Road, and it received traders from many parts of the world, including many Muslims who erected their own houses of worship here. We were in Quanzhou on a day where a lot of people were out, but West Street is always busy. It is where visitors can buy every kind of souvenir and every kind of street food their heart could desire. Even if it gets a bit busy, it is the most enjoyable kind of busy. Let us take you for a stroll here. When you visit, we'll just take you along, and we will even allow you some time to buy those things that you think you have to get when you're in China, and then when you get home you think, that's interesting. Quanzhou is halfway between Xiamen and Fuzhou, another city on my list of great coastal cities. Viking will call on the port of Pingtan, and that's where we went first. It was a bit windy, which is not unusual here. As a matter of fact, kite surfers have begun flocking here recently because the winds are steady and mostly predictable. This is why traditional houses in Pingtan are built using local stone, and roof tiles used to be kept in place with big rocks. You can still see that on the roofs today. In Pingtan, we went to a small but very well done museum that chronicles the history of the Taiwan Strait. And that history is rife with sea battles and with people coming across, pirates landing ashore, trying to occupy the island. It's a bit of a martial museum, but it's quite enjoyable because it's so well done. In the middle of the museum is a life-size replica of a Chinese warship. And neatly grouped around it is a number of galleries filled with artifacts and dioramas that really chronicle the story. What I really liked on the island were the small villages. There are always things to discover, whether it's a little cafe where the signature drink is a ginger latte, or a beach where local fishermen don't mind if you try to help them catch some fish. And that Pingtan is known for its rich offshore waters is on display in local restaurants, where the fish could not be any fresher. On the other side of the bridge that connects Pingtan to the mainland, we visited the Shi Jushuan Jioshuan temple, built in a very steep cliffside, almost like a bird's nest. When traveling to China, you visit your fair share of temples. It's a little bit like churches in Europe. But this one had a lot to offer that I had not encountered all that much in Buddhist temples. This one is Taoist, and a specialized one at that. Most people here do what is customary in most temples in China. Burning incense is symbolic for sending up prayers. And here, as in other places, a lot of it was sent to the heavens. But this one was the first temple where I had an opportunity to make a different kind of offering. In a big pit, you get to throw firecrackers. And the pit is made out of bricks, so the racket is just phenomenal. I'm not quite sure what the gods do with my firecrackers, but it was a lot of fun. Neat rows of plastic baskets filled with offerings are available for purchase, as is the paper money I also saw in Quanzhou. Where in Quanzhou it was burnt in an old-fashioned oven, here it was merely put at the feet of the deities to which people prayed. The most unusual feature here is a room with the altar to the 9 deities that help you realize your dreams. In the darkened room, visitors can actually lay down on mats and simply take a nap. So the whole idea is that as you sleep, your dream floats across the room to the 9 deities and they will help your dream come true. And if you believe that people can make your dreams come true, or deities can make your dream come true, then it makes perfect sense that you are very close to them as you have your dreams. It stands to reason. Later in the day, we enjoyed dinner in a lively neighborhood of Fuzhou, a town that really does a great job in maintaining its historical core and finding the right balance between making it attractive to visitors and at the same time not turning it into something that feels very artificial. It has the shops that sell beautiful knickknacks. Those are never far away, but it also has great art galleries. It has very entertaining and informative public art. And most importantly, as far as I'm concerned, bookstores and cafes, and quite a few of them. The Sanfang area, 3 lanes and 7 alleys in English, is nominated to become a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but Fuzhou still has a lot more to offer. One morning, we strolled around Qizhang Temple next to one of Fuzhou's universities. Because it somehow doesn't rank high on the TripAdvisor and other lists, it doesn't get so many visitors, and therefore it exudes this calm and tranquility that you would actually kind of expect when you go to a Buddhist temple to meditate. And this temple really delivers. It was one of my favorites in my travels in China recently. Its gardens, its pavilions, and its ponds, they invite you to really take it easy. And everyone that goes there has to be in awe of this lychee tree that still carries fruit. And that tree is over 1,000 years old. The next port on the coast I visited was Tongtao, an island port that is part of the greater Wenzhou area. Wenzhou is renowned in China for being the only city in the world that was planned by the Feng Shui philosopher Guo Pu. It is said that Wenzhou successfully warded off numerous attacks from enemies because of its superior layout and position. Feng Shui is a tradition that places great value at these things, the way elements in a great whole are positioned, how they are aligned, and generally the idea is to have mountains on one side, water on the other 3 sides. It stands to reason because strategically that makes perfect sense. It keeps the city defendable. But in Wenzhou, there's also an idea that people from Wenzhou, because the city has such great feng shui, are particularly brilliant and probably good at whatever it is that they try. Tongtao itself is an island of steep cliffs and winding roads and lovely views. Its history and its traditions and economy are explained in this tall building, the Wanhai Tower. It's a 4-story pavilion in the shape of a towering temple on one of the most scenic spots of the island. Next to it is the statue of Yan Yanji, and he was a 5th century nobleman and an administrator who built the first Wanhai Tower there. And he had the exact same thing in mind that visitors today think about when you're here. He just enjoyed the view. That was the main reason to build it there. On the far side of Dongtao is an unusual village that has been carefully restored and added on to. It is a former barracks. Dongtao long had a military presence because of its exposed location, again, on the Taiwan Strait. Today, a modern building next to it houses a small museum dedicated to the contribution of women in the military. The village is named after a legendary fictional character, Haisha, whose story was told in a popular movie in the 1960s. Aisha in this film is a woman who makes a living as a fisherwoman, probably from Dongtao, but she doesn't hesitate to take up arms when duty calls. And even today, young women, and they're members of what you could call a National Guard, can be seen exercising here, on a daily basis. Another interesting place in Dongtao is a pottery studio, where everything produced uses sea clay. There's a shop with beautiful simple items and a workshop where visitors can try their hand at a potter's wheel, or more modestly and with less ambition, at decorating a piece that has already been made by someone else. In the process, our guests will learn about the special qualities of this clay, how it is stored and prepared, where it comes from, and what you need to do before you can actually put it to good use. And finally, you guessed it, Dongtao is also known for its seafood. Not just any old seafood, there are the shrimp, there is the fish, but Dongtao is also known for its seaweed. There are farms all around the island, and the first time you see these, they really will puzzle you because they're unlike anything you might have seen anywhere else in the world. It's a big business, but unfortunately, Dewi and I, my colleague from the Netherlands who also works in China, she and I did not find any seaweed to eat, so we just went for shrimp after all. They just look too good not to try. Zhoushan's Guanyin altar is hard to explain. You have to see it. It is built as a place of pilgrimage. Nearby Putuoshan is the actual holy mountain, one of the four in Chinese Buddhism. But it's not so easy to get to, and the Buddhist organization in China is making a very concerted effort to support the practice of the religion with this shrine. And there's a nearby seminary, and there are other facilities. In one of them, I tried writing Chinese characters, not so much to create a masterful artistic expression, but to patiently and carefully draw characters on a scroll as a form of quiet, concentrated meditation. The shrine itself is several stories tall and has a great number of rooms filled with sculptures representing the pantheon of Buddha's deities through the centuries. You really need a little bit of a guide to explain what it is that you're looking at, because the pantheon is rather large. And then it's represented by era. So there is a pantheon of deities the way they would have been portrayed in the Song dynasty, how they're presented in the Yuan dynasty, and so on and so forth. Guanyin, the deity to whom the facility and the nearby island are dedicated, is said to hear the sounds of the world. She allays the worries and soothes the pains of people who suffer. And that has prompted some to call her, to westernize her name a little bit into the goddess of mercy. Mount Putuo itself, the small island that we visited after the Guanyin altar, has received pilgrims for over 1,000 years. And is one of the four holy mountains, as I mentioned earlier. It's a delightful place. You get there by ferry, and with the exception of small buses that can be ordered, there's no motorized traffic on the island. And that's just as well, because the walks along the water are just lovely. And even if the walking is a little bit up and down, the surroundings make any walk here a joy. We visited 3 temples, with Shuangquang being my favorite. It is much smaller than most others, and the monks here are particularly welcoming. Because it isn't very busy at all, you get a sense of having the temple to yourself. For the second time during my recent visit to China, I enjoyed, and I mean I really enjoyed, a vegetarian meal in a lovely restaurant embedded in the sacred architecture of Mount Putuo, where the spirit of Guanyin never seems to be all that far away. Before dinner that night, we stopped by the small fishing village of Dongsha, a place that is dealing with changes in the fisheries. As the fish seem to have moved on from Dongsha, it's busy reinventing itself. It has a small museum, a few historical houses, and a number of businesses that cater to visitors. There's also an effort to keep certain folk traditions, such as the puppet theater and the drumming, alive. My favorite is a gallery that sells artwork from local fishermen who paint. And you guessed it, what they paint are fish, shellfish, fishermen, boats, big feasts. I actually at home now have a beautiful, very colorful picture of an enormous feast in that village. I started and ended my latest trip to China in the city where my Chinese Viking colleagues have their office, Shanghai. As is true for most great world cities, like London, like New York and Paris, Shanghai is like the country, just more so. It's China, but it's a little bit more China than China. It is a city with something new and exciting lurks around every corner, where history is found in unusual places and the future stares you right in the face every time you happen to look up. I enjoyed a dinner at the home of a yellow winemaker while I was there. Very intimate experience Viking will be able to let small numbers of his guests also enjoy. I was happy to find a great bookstore in the French concession, one of the more laid-back parts of the city, and I enjoyed coffee and pastries in the sidewalk cafes there. I saw the latest exhibit at the new Shanghai Museum and explored the neighborhood around the Longhua Temple with its towering pagoda. And not far from there, I visited a monument to 24 young Chinese communist activists who were executed here by the Chinese nationalists. The park itself does not completely avoid what is common in these shrines, a degree of pathos, but the exhibits of the individual biographies of these revolutionaries does such a good job in painting a picture of just people that had a particular passion, that had a cause, and that got caught up in something bigger than themselves. On my last day in China, we visited the water town of Zhujiazhou, and I probably mispronounced that, but there are quite a few of these in the wider Yangtze River Delta area. They were often built near canals and branches of rivers or even on lakes, and they used water as transportation routes for all sorts of goods. Today, with their high bridges and narrow lanes, they're not particularly practical, but they're beautiful to look at, and they have simply adapted to a different trade, that of working for visitors. I stocked up on all kinds of exotic looking snacks, some delicious and some just interesting. And before it was time to get back to our coach, I figured we should have on one of these little bridges a little group picture that you can see here of my colleagues. And that kind of concludes my postcards from China for this time around. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you in China.